The icy wind hissed against the tall windows of the mountain estate, a modern fortress perched high above the Colorado Rockies. Inside, nestled around an opulent dining table carved from reclaimed cedar, the Prescott family gathered in anticipation. Velvet drapes swayed slightly as the draft slithered in, but the true chill came from the man at the head of the table, Silas Prescott, patriarch, tycoon, and master of every room he entered. "Congratulations, Nolan," Silas said, his voice like gravel wrapped in velvet. He slid a thick envelope across the polished wood toward his youngest son. "You've earned it." Nolan's hand hesitated a fraction of a second before closing over the envelope. He didn't look at his sister across the table. Didn't meet her eyes. He just lowered his head, feigned humility, and nodded. Everyone else around the table seemed to shrink back in tension. Harper Prescott sat silently, her hands clasped in her lap. At 37, she had long stopped expecting recognition, but this cut differently. It wasn't just being passed over, it was being dismissed. Erased. Her palms were damp against her slacks as she forced her breath to remain even. She caught her stepmother's eyes, Margot, all diamonds and control, but the woman quickly looked away, fingers twitching near the emerald clasp of her necklace. "And you, Harper," Silas turned, his words laced with disdain. "You've always had your head in the clouds. All that charity work, all that emotion, it's not fit for real life. You're not fit for this." Silence. A stillness so sharp it hummed. "I gave everything I had to people who had nothing," Harper replied, her voice soft but steady. "Not everyone measures worth in bottom lines." "Spare me the melodrama," Silas snapped, rolling his eyes. "You walked away. You chose your path. Now don't come crying when you find it led nowhere." The family attorney, Mr. Gerald Keene, coughed gently, shifting in his seat. A gray-haired man with a lined face and eyes that had seen decades of boardroom bloodshed, he reached for his folder. "Before we proceed," he said cautiously, "there's something you should know. An amendment was filed with your late mother's portfolio. Sealed. Specific instructions." Silas's expression hardened. "What amendment?" Mr. Keene didn't flinch. "Your mother retained a controlling share in the Prescott Trust until her passing. She had the legal right to make stipulations about its succession." Margot's hand froze near her necklace. "What stipulations?" Silas's voice had turned dangerous. Mr. Keene calmly withdrew a yellow document and laid it flat on the table. "This clause activates only under one condition: should Harper Prescott be disinherited by her father." Harper blinked. For a second, everything fell away, the house, the tension, the years of silence. It was her mother's handwriting, elegant and familiar, dancing across the page. Mr. Keene read aloud, "If my daughter Harper is ever deemed unworthy, I hereby bequeath to her full control of my share of Prescott International, including all associated voting rights, to take effect immediately and override any prior agreements." The room froze. "What the hell does that mean?" Silas barked. "It means," Mr. Keene said, turning to Harper, "she now holds a controlling interest. Legally, she is the majority shareholder of Prescott International." Harper's heartbeat thudded like a drum in her ears. Her father stood abruptly, chair screeching backward. "She doesn't even understand the business." "Perhaps not your version of it," Harper replied quietly, rising to her feet. "But I understand how to rebuild. How to protect. How to lead without crushing people." "You'll regret this," Silas hissed. Harper looked at him, not as a daughter pleading for approval, but as a woman standing in her own light. "I never wanted power. I just wanted you to see me. But I don't need that anymore." She turned to the lawyer. "Let's proceed." Margot's lips parted to protest but said nothing. Nolan still stared down at the table. Silas remained frozen, his jaw clenched, fury and disbelief clashing behind his eyes. "But Harper?" She walked out with her head high, unaware that the real storm hadn't passed, it was only beginning. The next morning, the snow was falling hard over the mountaintop, layering the modern steel and glass headquarters of Prescott International in soft white silence. But inside, chaos churned just beneath the surface. Word of Harper Prescott's unexpected ascent had spread like wildfire. She arrived at the office just after 7, her coat still dusted with snow, and walked through the front doors with the same quiet determination that had once gone unnoticed. Not anymore. The receptionist blinked as if seeing a ghost, then quickly stood, stammering a greeting. Harper nodded politely and kept walking. Each hallway she passed was littered with murmurs. Executives who once barely acknowledged her now nodded too eagerly. Assistants who had whispered about her soft heart now looked on with curiosity or fear. She didn't return the stares. Her thoughts were focused on one thing, finding the rot before it consumed everything. Her first act wasn't a grand speech or a massive firing, it was listening. She walked into departments where the old Prescott rule had long forbidden her kind of presence. The charity worker. The emotional one. The sibling who hadn't played the game. Now, she was the one rewriting the rules. In the communications department, she asked for feedback instead of metrics. In logistics, she sat with the manager to review complaints that had gone ignored. She spoke to team leads, not just executives. She walked the warehouse floor in flats, not heels. And by week's end, she found more than she'd expected. Departments had been pitted against each other under her brother's reign. Promotions were based on loyalty to Nolan, not competence. HR complaints had vanished without trace. Several charities the company claimed to support hadn't received a dime in months. Budget reports were filled with questionable line items. And that's when she found the first red flag. A transfer, 6 figures, made from the community outreach budget to a shell company registered under the name E. Penrose. It took her a single phone call to confirm it. Penrose was Nolan's college roommate. Her stomach turned. That night, Harper sat in her office long after everyone had gone home. The fireplace crackled behind her, the only warmth in a room that felt too large, too quiet. She spread out spreadsheets, invoices, transaction logs, dozens of threads waiting to be pulled. She didn't hear the door open until it was too late. "Working late, sis?" Nolan's voice was casual, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. She didn't look up. "There's a lot to untangle. Must be exhausting," he said, stepping in and tossing a folder onto her desk. "Thought I'd save you some time." She opened it slowly. Inside were color-printed screenshots, edited email chains, and what appeared to be donation logs. Bearing Harper's name. They claimed she had rerouted charitable funds to an organization she once worked for. The implication was clear: embezzlement. "These are fake," she said calmly, flipping through them. "Can you prove that?" Nolan asked, leaning against the edge of her desk. "Because I've got a dozen shareholders who love a scandal to chew on." She met his eyes. "Why are you doing this?" He gave a humorless laugh. "Because you weren't supposed to win. You weren't supposed to exist in this space. You walked away, remember? You gave up your seat. I didn't give it up. I chose a different road. A weaker one," he snapped. "This isn't a sanctuary, Harper. It's war. It's power plays. Strategy. Not compassion and potlucks. I'm not here to play war," she said, voice steady. "I'm here to fix what's broken." "That's the problem," he said, stepping closer. "You think it's broken. You don't realize it was working perfectly. For me. And not for anyone else." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "You've got 2 months, Harper. Maybe less. Before you're eaten alive." She didn't reply. As the door shut behind him, Harper sat back in her chair. The fire had gone low. She stared at the fake documents, at Nolan's smirk still echoing in the room. For a moment, just a moment, doubt flickered. Her father had always said she wasn't built for this. That she was too soft. Too emotional. That people like her got crushed in places like this. But people like her also built safe spaces. People like her listened. People like her healed. And she wasn't alone. The next morning, Rosa, the janitor who'd been at the company longer than most of the board, knocked quietly on Harper's door. She held a steaming paper cup in one hand and a file in the other. "Coffee," she said with a small smile. "And something I think you'll want to see." Harper took the cup, grateful. "What is it?" "Records. Backup logs from the old server room. I don't think Nolan remembered those existed." Harper opened the file. Inside were internal logs, timestamps, access records, security footage. "Evidence. You kept this?" Harper asked. Rosa shrugged. Someone had to. A breath caught in Harper's throat. She set the coffee down and turned back to her desk, hope rekindling in her chest. Maybe she wasn't built for war. Maybe she was built for justice. And maybe, just maybe, the quiet ones had the loudest legacies after all. The boardroom buzzed with tension. 12 men and women lined the long obsidian table, each one handpicked over the years by Silas Prescott himself. These were the gatekeepers of Prescott International, strategists, investors, industrial architects. Many had known Harper since she was a teenager, and few had ever taken her seriously. Until now. Harper stood at the head of the table, dressed in a muted navy blouse and a blazer that had once belonged to her mother. No flashy entrance. No entourage. Just her, holding a leather binder, with Rosa seated quietly at her right as her assistant. She didn't need to fill the room with sound. Her silence did that well enough. "Well, Miss Prescott," began Edwin Cormier, the board's acting chairman, "we've been receiving concerning reports. Allegations, really. Documents. Screenshots. False documents," Harper said evenly, opening her binder. "Fabricated by someone afraid of losing control." Another board member, Ms. Tran, leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "Can you prove that?" "Yes," Harper replied, and clicked the remote. The lights dimmed. The screen at the end of the room lit up with grainy black and white footage, time-stamped security footage showing Nolan entering the secure archive room at 3:14 a.m., carrying a USB stick. Then again, at 3:57, a second visit. 2 files were downloaded. The document names matched the so-called evidence against Harper. She let the video play out without comment. Murmurs rose. Several board members exchanged uneasy glances. One of them cursed under his breath. Next, Harper passed around copies of internal reports, 3 unapproved vendor contracts tied to shell corporations. Funds routed through aliases linked to Nolan's personal accounts. One file detailed falsified bonuses issued to fake employees in the communications department, money that disappeared soon after. "I'm not here to humiliate my brother," Harper said, her voice steady. "But I am here to stop a legacy of manipulation." A heavy silence fell. "And what do you suggest?" asked Mr. Cormier, tapping his pen nervously. Harper took a breath. "Nolan Prescott is to be placed on immediate suspension pending a full internal audit. A third-party compliance firm will be brought in. Every terminated employee from the last 5 years will be reevaluated for reinstatement." "And what about you?" another board member challenged. "You think this makes you a leader?" She looked them all in the eye. "No. I think my actions will show whether I am." Then she added, "And if any of you can prove those fabricated allegations are real, I will step down. Today." Silence again. But this time, it wasn't just hesitation, it was respect. Some even nodded subtly. Harper had given them something few had offered in this boardroom: accountability without ego. Moments later, Mr. Cormier sighed and stood. "A vote will be held to approve the audit process and your terms. But for what it's worth, Miss Prescott." He hesitated. "You just did more to protect this company in 1 week than others have in years." As the boardroom emptied, Rosa placed a hand on Harper's shoulder. "Your mother would have been proud." Harper smiled faintly. "Let's hope I can live up to her." The media storm hit again, but this time, it played differently. New CEO exposes internal scandal, refuses to press charges. Prescott heiress turns corporate crisis into opportunity for reform. Her inbox overflowed with PR statements, legal briefings, and shareholder responses. Some were outraged. Others inspired. A few were cautiously optimistic. But the most unexpected message came on a Monday evening, tucked between 2 investor emails. Subject line: "A letter I should have written sooner." From Nolan Prescott. Harper opened it carefully, uncertain what to expect. Harper. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a response. I just didn't want the last thing I said to be a threat. I thought being chosen meant being loved. I thought if I proved myself useful to Dad, I'd finally be more than just the second son. I didn't realize I was becoming a shadow of him instead. You didn't steal anything from me. You earned it differently. I see that now. I'm stepping away. Not just from the company, but from the illusion that power makes you worthy. I hope, someday, we can talk. Not as rivals. Just as brother and sister. N. Harper read the email twice, then closed her laptop. She didn't cry. Not because it didn't move her, it did, but because she finally felt something else stronger than grief or anger, clarity. That night, she walked through the executive floor. The halls felt different. Brighter. Not because of the lights, but because people weren't walking with dread. Employees paused to say hello. The cafeteria buzzed with voices, not silence. She passed by Rosa organizing documents in the community outreach wing. How does it feel? Rosa asked. Harper paused, thoughtful. Like the storm's not over. But at least I know where I stand. Rosa smiled. Then you're already ahead. Later that week, Harper stood alone in the office her father had once ruled from. The walls still bore his taste, cold steel accents, leather-bound books no one had read in years, oil paintings of power and wealth. She reached into her bag and pulled out the small wooden compass her mother had left her, the one that pointed not north, but home. She placed it on the desk, front and center, and beside it, a framed photo of the women's shelter where she once worked. A knock came. It wasn't a secretary or board member. It was her father. Silas Prescott stood in the doorway, a man who had once seemed carved from stone. Now, he looked smaller. Older. I had to see it, he said, not stepping in. Had to see for myself that you didn't burn it all down. I never wanted to, Harper said. I just wanted to be seen. Silas glanced around the room, then at her. I was wrong. About a lot of things. Harper said nothing. He reached into his coat and pulled out a photo. Harper, 12 years old, covered in paint. Her mother laughing beside her. She said you'd change this family, he whispered. I didn't want to believe it. If I did, Harper said softly, it's because she believed in me. He nodded slowly. I just came to say. I'm sorry. The apology didn't erase the past. But it cracked something open. Something that allowed air to flow where silence had been choking. Thank you, Harper replied. Don't waste it. He gave her one final, lingering look, then walked away. As his footsteps faded, Harper turned back to the compass, then to the city skyline outside the window. She didn't just survive the trial. She transformed it. And that was only the beginning. 6 weeks after the storm broke, Prescott International began to breathe again. It didn't happen with sweeping reforms or headlines declaring revolution. It began in quiet places, the break room, the elevator, the morning check-ins, where people started looking each other in the eye again. Where silence no longer signaled fear but calm. Where voices weren't lowered at the mention of leadership. Harper Prescott didn't rebrand the company with a glossy PR campaign or roll out an inspirational manifesto. She simply listened. Observed. Reached out. And most importantly, she remembered. She remembered every employee file Rosa had handed her. Every name on the list of those who had once dared to speak truth and had been silenced for it. She read each file late into the night, cafeteria staff, mid-tier analysts, IT technicians, an HR manager who had tried to report financial inconsistencies but was dismissed 3 days later. 2 weeks later, letters went out. Not HR contracts. Not subpoenas. Just simple invitations. You once gave this company your truth. It cost you your position. I'd like to invite you back, not because you were right, but because your voice still matters here. If you choose to return, you'll be welcomed with respect and no questions asked. Warmly. Harper Prescott, acting chairwoman. Most thought it was a trick. A formality. A guilt-ridden PR stunt. But one by one, they came back. Like Noah Landry, a systems engineer who had questioned security gaps and been let go within a week. Or Camille Vargas, a former outreach director whose proposal to redirect funds toward real community engagement was labeled soft by Nolan's inner circle. Camille returned not to reclaim her role, but to help Harper build something new, the Department of Ethical Strategy. Harper gave them freedom to redesign, not rebuild what was broken. They weren't just returning to a job. They were helping to restore a vision. It wasn't easy. There were murmurs. Dissent from old guard department heads who resisted the changes. Whispers of she's too idealistic, or she's running a charity, not a business. Shareholders who had tolerated her now sent careful emails questioning her long-term strategy. But Harper never wavered. Instead, she created a ripple effect. For the first time in company history, employees at every level were invited to submit anonymous proposals for company improvements, no hierarchy, no gatekeeping. The submissions poured in. Some were simple: a better coffee machine, updated maternity leave policies. Others were sweeping: revamping the entire supplier ethics system, launching internal mental health resources, opening internships to underserved communities. Harper read every single one. Some made her laugh. Others made her cry. But the message was clear: people wanted to believe in something again. And so did she. It was on a brisk Tuesday morning that Harper received the most unexpected update from accounting. A private donation, 7 figures, had been made in her name to the Haven Collective, the women's shelter she had once worked at. No note. No contact. Just a record from an anonymous account traced back to Silas Prescott. She sat in her office for a long time, holding the receipt in her hand, staring at her mother's compass on the desk. Her father hadn't said another word since that brief conversation weeks ago. But this gesture, quiet and devoid of pride, was louder than any apology. He wasn't looking for redemption. He was trying to understand what that word even meant. Harper tucked the receipt into a drawer beside her mother's old photo. Some things didn't need to be framed. They just needed to be remembered. Later that week, Rosa came in holding a file. "Something I think you should see," she said. Inside was a breakdown of company hierarchy from the last 5 years. Hidden pay disparities, performance reviews rewritten by upper management, promotions denied based on loyalty risk. This was how they kept control, Rosa said quietly. Fear. Harper's jaw tightened. Then let's start somewhere no one expects us to. She stood up and walked to the very top floor, where the executive lounge overlooked the entire city skyline. It had been Nolan's favorite spot: untouchable, reserved, exclusive. She called a press conference and announced the opening of the Prescott Collective, a leadership training program aimed at rising mid-level employees from diverse backgrounds. The lounge would be converted into a collaborative hub: no more velvet rope. No more power gates. No seat in this company should be reserved for fear, she said. It should be earned through merit, strengthened by empathy, and shared in service. The media scrambled to keep up. Prescott International launches unprecedented ethics initiative. From heiress to healer, Harper Prescott's quiet revolution. But Harper didn't care about headlines. She cared about the janitor who smiled when she passed, no longer averting his gaze. She cared about the new employee onboarding session where someone asked, "What does leadership mean to this company now?" And the answer came, not from her, but from Camille: "It means you matter." She cared about the hallway where her mother's portrait now hung, not in the executive corridor, but in the employee commons, beside a plaque that read, "Quiet strength is still strength. Let this place remember her voice." That weekend, Harper met Nolan for coffee. It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't even a forgiveness session. They sat quietly for minutes before he finally spoke. "I read about the lounge," he said, stirring his black coffee. "Never thought you'd open that too. Everyone. Wasn't mine to keep," she said. He nodded, not quite agreeing, but not arguing either. "You really believe this changes anything?" She shrugged. "It's a start." They didn't talk about the past. Not the betrayal. Not the inheritance. Not the lies. They talked about books. About the view. About their mother's terrible taste in folk music. When they parted, there were no promises. But there was a silence that didn't take. That night, Harper returned to the office to finalize the first company-wide ethical audit results. Rosa had left a note on her desk in looping cursive. "You're not just changing the company, Miss Prescott. You're changing the people in it. Including me." Harper sat at her desk, the city lights flickering outside, the air full of stories she hadn't yet heard. No, she didn't burn the kingdom. She rebuilt it, with open doors, open hands, and the quiet power of a healer. 6 months had passed since Harper Prescott became the steward of a legacy she never asked for, but had grown into with quiet conviction. Prescott International was no longer the cold, gleaming empire it once was. It hadn't grown shinier or more extravagant, it had grown warmer. Staff turnover dropped to an all-time low. Internal engagement was at a record high. Departments once ruled by fear were now sharing knowledge and resources without the silent hierarchy that had haunted them. Harper walked the halls without an entourage. People called her by name, not title. Her office remained simple, no gold plaques, no unnecessary opulence, just her mother's compass, a rotating stack of employee-sent thank-you notes, and a long row of framed portraits of staff members from every level of the company, each captioned with a single word they had chosen to define their role: resilience, growth, hope. But one frame was missing. And that was why she wasn't sleeping well. Because in all this healing, in all this progress, there remained a space, empty, unnamed, for someone who hadn't yet stepped back into the light. Her father. Silas Prescott had vanished after that quiet, heartfelt apology in her office. No media sightings. No legal disputes. No scathing interviews or financial counter-moves. Just silence. Harper didn't chase him. She couldn't rebuild him the way she'd rebuilt the company. But part of her still hoped. Because hope, she'd learned, didn't have to be loud. Sometimes, it was just a seat left open at a table. And one Sunday morning, that seat was filled. She arrived early to the office, planning to review the new mentorship program drafts before the week began. But when she opened the door, there he was, sitting in the visitor chair across her desk, coat neatly folded on his lap, his cane leaning against the edge. He looked older. Not just in years, but in energy. Less imposing. More human. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Harper said quietly, not moving to sit yet. Silas looked around her office, eyes lingering on the photos. The compass. The atmosphere. "It doesn't look like mine," he said finally. "No," she said. "It never did." He gave a tired smile. "I see that now." She sat down, folding her hands in her lap. "Why are you here?" He exhaled slowly, as if every word cost him more than he was used to paying. "Because I've spent the past 30 years building a fortress. And it took me losing it to realize I never once built a home." Harper said nothing. "I kept thinking. If I made it big enough, ruthless enough, no one could hurt me. Not competitors, not partners, not even family. But I was wrong. I did the hurting." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. "I've been drafting this for months. My formal resignation from the Prescott Trust Board. My shares, all of them, are being placed into a community reinvestment initiative. Under your leadership." Harper blinked. "Why?" "Because I don't know how to lead this world you're building. But I believe in it now." She studied him carefully. "You once said I was too weak. That kindness was a flaw." "I know," he replied, his voice raw. "But I see now, it's a kind of strength I never learned. You didn't win because you were ruthless. You won because you never became me." Harper stood and walked to the window. The city was waking up. Families were walking dogs, coffee shops were opening. Somewhere down there, a former janitor was managing logistics for a new mentorship program. A tech intern was preparing to pitch a sustainability plan that Harper had personally encouraged. And here was her father, finally facing the truth not as a man in power, but as a man trying to grow. When she turned back, Silas was still seated. Still waiting. "I forgive you," Harper said softly. His eyes filled with something she'd never seen in them before: shame, yes, but also relief. "Thank you," he whispered. "I know that doesn't fix everything." "No," she replied. "But it breaks the cycle. And that's enough for today." They sat together in silence after that, watching the morning unfold beyond the glass walls. No more ultimatums. No power plays. Just two people choosing not to continue a legacy of pain. In the months that followed, Harper's vision deepened. The Prescott Collective grew into a training pipeline for future business leaders from underserved communities, with mentorship programs run by returning employees. The Ethical Strategy Department became a model for other corporations seeking transformation without losing soul. The company partnered with citywide rehabilitation programs, veteran services, and shelters, initiatives once dismissed as soft but now proving essential for long-term sustainability. Even the Prescott brand changed, not its name, but its meaning. Where once it stood for prestige and power, it now stood for trust. Harper didn't attend red carpet galas or feature on magazine covers, though invitations flooded in. Instead, she used those moments to lift others, highlighting her team, forwarding opportunities, nominating others for recognition. Legacy, she realized, wasn't about being remembered. It was about what people remembered feeling when you left the room. One afternoon, as she walked through the lobby, a young intern approached her with wide eyes and a trembling notebook. "Miss Prescott?" the girl asked nervously. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Everyone talks about your leadership. How you turned this place around. But, how did you know what to do?" Harper smiled gently. "I didn't," she said. "I just knew what not to do." She handed the girl her card. "Come by next week. Let's talk more." And just like that, another seat opened at the table. At home that night, Harper sat with a cup of tea, her mother's compass on the coffee table in front of her. She unfolded the last letter her mother had written, the one she had only just begun to truly understand. "You were never meant to fight fire with fire, Harper. You were meant to carry water. To soften stone. To grow things where others only saw ash. You won't shout the loudest, but your silence will echo in generations. Lead with kindness. Lead with grace. And never forget, you were born to change the world, not to conquer it." Tears welled in her eyes, not from pain, but from peace. Because she hadn't claimed a throne. She'd planted a garden. And in the quiet, steady legacy she was building, one where people were seen, heard, and believed, Harper Prescott had become something greater than powerful. She had become trusted. And no one could take that away.